On the ropes of annihilation, mankind re-emerged from the world wars into the chaos of ballooning Western imperialism in Southeast Asia and the nascent expansion of corporate industry with aims to codify its own condition and rights. Conception of the human and its place in a broader, more expansive world persisted through existentialism onto the student movement, secular humanism, and made its way into popular fiction. Yet as the social liberalism of the New Deal era waned and post-war embedded liberalism took root, responses by intellectuals, elected officials, and corporations were as varied as and as fragmented as the fiction the era had produced. The condition of mankind became polymorphic and itself an expression of the discontinuity of the post-war era. This paper seeks to draw connections with an apparent periodization of the conditions of mankind and the fiction of Joseph Heller, marking him out as a writer particularly adept at responding to the continual and sudden reformations of thought, or discontinuity, of the times. In the wake of this discontinuity, attempts to reshape mankind were waged in overwhelming fashion by dominant structural regimes. The role of mankind in its particular habitus became rooted in its ability to produce within or to be a production of an ideologically driven apparatus. Mankind's freedom of choice was replaced systematically over time with choice existing merely as the presentation of the only viable option left. Man was dehumanized. In losing its own agency for choice, mankind was then a tool for its own mistreatment and destruction. Man was instrumentalized. Accordingly, individuals and groups became the loci of an attempt by regimes to reconstitute mankind as something altogether stripped of humanity. The mechanisms for the dehumanization and instrumentalization of the human are manifold, and the consequences endlessly disheartening. As conduits for more expressive and reactionary opinion, fiction maintained its role as one of many cultural barometers in the post-war era. Popular writers like Norman Mailer and James Jones were not lost to the barbarism of World War II, and yet their war fiction centered on the heroism of the fighting man. Their naturalist war heroes seemed outmoded and unresponsive to the times, as heroism and bravery shifted from the battlefield to the demonstration. Suddenly, man was more valiant for refusing to fight than for fighting. Undercutting authority and standing up to bureaucracy was the new American way offered by some leading fiction writers and intellectuals. The act of laying bare the consequences of the variety of dehumanizing treatments ushered in a new era of the novel. This new novel attempted to mirror the absurdity of the times, forcing readers to live in the murky dream state of the post-war era, which it often demanded. Stepping into this milieu, Joseph Heller became a literary force with the 1961 publication of Catch-22. What would become an era-defining work for left-wing anti-establishment types began in 1953 on legal notepads and corporate ad-writing stationery. His two following novels, Something Happened, 1974, and Good as Gold, 1979, would not have the cultural staying power, but nonetheless can be viewed as tokens of scathing fictions aimed at their dominant regimes. As true missiles of the era, these three novels each offer unique criticisms of the three most dominant regimes of authority: American militarism, corporate industry, and national politics. Broken into three chapters, first, this paper will use an existential conception of the human as a basis for its understanding of dehumanization as it occurs in Catch-22. Drawing upon Jean-Paul Sartre's two influential works, Existentialism and Humanism, and Existentialism is a Humanism, as well as the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I seek to show how the removal of man's ability to pursue transcendent aims is a concerted effort by the military regime to dehumanize. Then I will show how dehumanization leads to instrumentalization, or the manipulation and perpetuation of the regime's ideology and its consequences on the status of mankind. Second, using the Students for a Democratic Society's Port Huron statement as a guide for the era's status of the human, it will be shown how the corporate regime of Something Happened relies on trenchant hierarchy, immaterial labor, and the removal of a shared world experience to purposely obscure and misplace the human. As a result, readers see Heller engage with the fragmentation of the late post-war era through the mental psychosis of a stream of consciousness narrator. Instead, however, of the optimism presented in Catch-22, Something Happened leans fully into the coercion of the industrial corporation, giving a fatalistic view on the instrumentalized status of man. Third, this paper will use the Humanist Manifesto 2 and the beginnings of a neoliberal ideology to show how the dehumanization of the late 1970s centers on a systematic removal of political and social responsibility. Through Good as Gold, Heller critiques the transformation of man from Homo politicus, man as essentially a political being, to Homo economicus, man as a self-interested economic agent. I will further show how the political regime's ambivalence to poverty and despair can lead once responsible members of the polis past instrumentalization and to a total disengagement of the project of democracy.